このレッスンではどういった方法で日本語を勉強すればいいかについて総合的な説明したいと思います。Okay, you guys got all that? Just kidding. In this overview video, we're going to take a look at some general concepts and strategies for learning Japanese. This will give you a good roadmap if you're completely new to Japanese, and perhaps some useful tips if you studied it before. If you were to teach English to a complete beginner, you would naturally start by teaching the alphabet, right? I mean, would you teach Japanese people English by writing English words in Japanese? Is that really a good idea? So for step 1, you want to start by learning Hiragana. Hiragana is kind of like the most basic alphabet for Japanese. Japanese kids learn it when they first start out, just like we did with the ABCs. Instead of Hiragana, you may see other Japanese learning material use something called Romaji. If you're not familiar with Romaji, it's a system of using the English alphabet to spell Japanese words as it's pronounced. Not surprisingly, it doesn't quite match the actual Japanese writing system, so it has several variations and is actually way more complicated than Hiragana, so it's a terrible way to learn. The only use of Romaji I would recommend is for typing in Japanese on a computer. Otherwise, I recommend avoiding it in your studies at all costs. If you've been intimidated by the Japanese writing system, first of all, Hiragana is not the thousands of Chinese characters you may have heard about. We'll get to that later. In fact, it's a very simple set of only 51 phonetic characters. Phonetic means that Japanese is much easier to learn to read because each character has exactly only one sound. You never have to worry about whether the H is silent or if it's tomato or tomato. Once you learn it, you'll know exactly how to pronounce any word in Japanese. Here are some tips for learning Hiragana. First of all, many resources will teach you the 51 main characters that you need to learn, but there are also some additional sounds that could be made in various ways that you need to pay attention to, especially the long vowel sound. You can check out my later videos and my website to learn all about Hiragana in detail. A second important tip is that you don't have to try too hard to memorize Hiragana perfectly at first. As you continue in your studies, you'll use Hiragana so much that eventually it'll become second nature to read it and write it. After you learn Hiragana, you may want to jump straight into learning Katakana. This is another writing system that works in exactly the same way as Hiragana, but is primarily used for foreign loanwords such as email or hamburger. You don't have to learn it right away, so you can also decide to skip it and learn it later, but it is useful for quickly learning a lot of words taken from English. You can check out my other videos to learn Katakana. After you've learned Hiragana, you'll want to learn vocabulary and grammar and apply what you've learned by practicing. These steps are an iterative process, so you'll want to repeat them as you get more advanced in your studies. Here are some tips for learning vocabulary. While Hiragana and Katakana are unique to Japanese, you also need to learn Kanji, which are Chinese characters adapted for the Japanese language. While Hiragana and Katakana are used to express only sounds, each kanji character has a meaning and one or more readings. It is also used extensively in written Japanese, so you'll need to learn how it works, which I cover in a later video. While we're used to learning the whole alphabet for Romance languages, I do not recommend that you memorize kanji by themselves. Not only are there way too many to learn at once, but kanji can also be read in different ways depending on which word it's in. I won't go over all the details in this video, but to summarize, all you need to do is learn new words with kanji. That way you'll know exactly which readings to use for a given word, and you can also learn them gradually as you expand your vocabulary. Finally, finding words in kanji can be extremely time-consuming and difficult using paper dictionaries. That's why I strongly recommend using electronic dictionaries, whether it be on your computer or some other device. I go over how to use an electronic dictionary in another video. Once you've learned some vocabulary, obviously we'll need some grammar to be able to string those words into sentences. My main advice as you start learning grammar is to forget and unlearn everything you know about grammar. Don't try to tie English grammatical concepts such as sentence order, subject, etc. to what might at first appear to be similar things in Japanese. In addition, try to avoid translating as much as possible. Sure, you need to learn the definitions of each word, but don't bother trying to translate whole sentences into grammatically correct sentences in your native language. The only way you want to translate anything is very literal translations in order to understand how the sentence is structured. For example, as for me, movie saw is a much better translation than I saw a movie for learning purposes. Finally, this ties into the next slide, but translating from your native language into Japanese almost never works. So make sure to get lots of input instead of translating from English. Once you've learned some grammar and vocabulary, you'll want to apply your knowledge as much as possible in real-life situations. Unlike traditional subjects such as history or math, language is more of a skill that you need practice to perfect. Just like you can't learn to swim in a classroom, you'll need to go out there and apply what you learn in the real world. People often ask me why they can't speak fluently after studying for many years in the classroom, and I always ask how many hours did they spend speaking with regular people. It usually turns out that they were so wrapped up in books, tests, and homework that they spent little time practicing by actually speaking the language. In addition, just like how children learn languages by mimicking their parents, it's extremely important to learn how things are phrased and said by getting lots of input. In other words, you're ready to express a certain idea or thought once you've read or heard similar ideas expressed many times. Translating from English by stringing words from a dictionary almost never results in natural Japanese. In short, do lots of listening and reading before speaking and writing, and try to copy native speakers as much as possible. As you practice Japanese to apply what you've learned, one of the biggest mistakes I see is people being afraid of making mistakes. I see learners only sticking to what they already know, and even worse, staying silent if they don't know how to say something. It's very important to learn to ask questions and for guidance on things you don't know how to express in Japanese yet. That way you can get additional input and learn by copying what a native speaker would have said in that situation. We often see mistakes as something bad, but mistakes are actually one of the best ways to learn if there's somebody to correct you. Mistakes are only bad if they're left uncorrected and become bad habits. In addition, Japanese people may not want to offend you by correcting your mistakes, so make sure that they understand that not only is it okay, but that you want and highly appreciate any corrections in your Japanese. Ask for corrections, appreciate them, and treat them for the treasures that they are. For the last step, you want to rinse and repeat the steps that we just went over. Obviously, you're not going to learn all the grammar and vocabulary in Japanese and then start practicing. Language acquisition is an iterative process where you learn some grammar and vocabulary, apply what you've learned to master it, and then learn some more grammar and vocabulary to continue into more advanced topics. Remember that everything you've learned so far in your life, whether it be daily activities, clothes, furniture, history, or even chores, need to be relearned again using completely different words and concepts. Therefore, a new language is not something you can master by taking classes a few hours a week. You need to integrate Japanese into your daily life, whether it be listening to it during your commute, exercise, or chores, switching from Hollywood movies to Japanese movies, or socializing with friends who speak Japanese. You don't have to live in Japan to surround yourself with Japanese, but with all the time that's required to learn it, you want to make sure that it's an enjoyable experience by tying it into your hobbies, interests, and overall enjoyable company. You're not going to last long if something that requires hours upon hours to learn is also either extremely painful or boring. I would say learning how to integrate Japanese into your life in an enjoyable manner is the most important thing you need to do to prevent burnout or quitting. In conclusion, if you take the right approach, you can reach a level where you can speak fairly fluently and live in Japan with relative ease in just a few years. I've seen it happen many times. However, you can take it as far as you want to. I've been studying Japanese for well over 10 years and I'm still learning new things. Learning Japanese has changed my life for the better in so many ways, and I'm sure if you approach it with a positive mindset that it can be a great experience for you as well. Have fun! And don't forget to check out my website and videos to start learning now.